Most individuals travel through life clinging to notions that appear intelligent yet quietly hold them back. They follow advice that sounds helpful but keeps them stranded. They chase development in straight lines, trying to grow by ticking off familiar boxes. But growth doesn't operate that way. Not real growth. Not the kind that transforms you deeply and lasts. That kind of change rarely follows the rules. You can't outgrow your patterns with the same thinking that developed them. You can't shape a new identity using solely the instruments that shaped the old one. You need something different, something deeper. Something that doesn't just tell you what to do, but teaches you how to think in new ways, how to see with fresh eyes, how to go through life with a new lens, not just a longer list of goals. People are inundated in advice. Accomplish harder, set objectives, track progress, wake earlier, push through, never stop, be consistent, stay appreciative, be patient, be relentless, trust the process, speak your truth, own your time, protect your energy. But in all that cacophony, they lose how to listen to their own existence. They forget how to pause. They forget how to walk the opposite way when the crowd leads nowhere. Growth isn't always reasonable. It isn't always efficient. It's not always pretty. Sometimes it's clumsy. Sometimes it's slow. Sometimes it feels like slipping backward before anything advances ahead. And if you don't have the correct mindset, if you're just looking for the clear road, the flawless checklist, the obvious answer, you'll miss it. You'll get discouraged. You'll think something's wrong with you. It virtually never fits the mold. You don't just need additional advice, you need a fresh lens. The kind of wisdom that doesn't come from self-help books or popular postings, but from those who've built something from nothing. Those who've led without applause. Those who forged discipline in silence. Those who've experienced failure and emerged out with direction. Because those people hold a distinct kind of wisdom. It's not flashy, but it's real. It's not there to impress, it's there to endure. Growth is personal, but it manifests itself in how you lead, how you communicate, how you build, how you heal, how you show up when it would be easier not to. You can't grow at work if you're shrinking at home. You can't raise your results if your habits stay flat. You can't establish true influence without tested integrity. True progress is alignment of mind, body, soul, voice, and leadership, not separation. That's what separates apart the stalled from the forward moving. Not luck, but perspective, approach, the willingness to act when others would wait. And that mindset, it's not handed to you, it's earned. Through reflection, through resistance, through daring moves that won't make sense until they're part of your story. So this isn't about providing you 10 simple steps. It's about modifying how you see your own progress. It's about giving ideas that might challenge you at first, but stay with you. It's about rejecting the mundane so you may create something amazing, something unusual, something that not only gets you ahead, but makes you proud. The first unusual principle for meaningful growth, personal or professional, is this: get proficient at starting before you feel ready, not just willing, skilled. Because if you wait till you're ready, you'll wait forever. Readiness is a fallacy. It's a feeling you imagine you'll experience when everything lines up. When the fear leaves, when your confidence soars, when the timing is exactly right, but that feeling rarely shows up. And if it does, it generally arrives too late, after the moment has passed. The people who mature swiftly, who move differently, who stand out, they've mastered the knack of going forward without full assurance. They've taught their thoughts to take action before they're fully convinced. They recognize that clarity comes via action, not before it. And once you recognize it, everything alters. You stop sitting on the sidelines waiting for confidence to miraculously materialize. You begin taking modest, difficult steps with whatever belief you can find. The concept that one day you'll wake up perfectly confident about a decision you've never taken, a talent you've never learned, or an environment you've never entered is a trap. It seems soothing, yet it keeps people locked, confusing dread for unreadiness. But that's not the truth. Fear isn't the enemy. Waiting for it to disappear just slows growth. Growth demands discomfort. And discomfort seems like fear when it's unknown. But they're not the same. Fear is only the emotional warning that you're entering the unknown. And if you want a better life, if you want to produce something exceptional, you'll need to get comfortable with uncertainty. Not pandemonium, not recklessness, just uncertainty. That space where the future isn't mapped out, yet you keep moving anyway. Most people regard that space like it's harmful. They freeze, they overthink, they hesitate, they wait for more proof, more indicators, more certainty. But the people who thrive, they don't need a detailed plan to take a move. They don't wait for permission. They don't hush every doubt. They merely take the next step, then the next, then another, until confidence catches up. Because that's how confidence actually works. It's not the beginning point, it's the outcome. You do the thing while you're terrified, you fumble through it, you show up imperfect, you get it wrong. You improve, and somewhere along the way, confidence grows. Not because you waited, but because you acted. Waiting to feel ready before starting is like waiting to be in shape before going to the gym. It makes no sense. You create readiness by doing. You start before you completely believe. You act before you feel certain. You stretch before you're flexible. And if you do it long enough, what previously horrified you becomes normal. That doesn't mean hurrying. It doesn't imply being careless. It merely means you stop waiting for some right mindset before moving. It implies you let dread join the adventure without giving it the steering wheel. You learn to walk with it, breathe through it, carry it, but not obey it. Fear can come along, but it doesn't get to lead. And the more you live this way, the more opportunities start to seem different. You cease analyzing every decision through, am I ready? And start asking, is this aligned? You stop chasing certainty and start chasing alignment. If it's aligned with your beliefs, your vision, your growth, it's enough. You move. And you let the learning emerge through action. People will question how you grew so quickly, how you made so much progress. They'll presume you had some secret, some edge, some unwavering confidence. They don't. But you'll know the truth. You didn't wait. You started. And you let the growth meet you in motion. The second uncommon recommendation for personal and professional progress is to purposefully arrange time to think. Not just time to plan, to reflect, to consider, to evaluate, because most people don't have a thinking problem, they have a thinking space problem. Their intellect are full, but their decisions are shallow. They're responding, not reasoning. They're functioning on instinct, not intention. And in a world that emphasizes speed, pausing to ponder feels unproductive. Sitting in silence feels sluggish. Slowing down to assess your life feels luxurious. But it's not. It's essential. Because if you don't think deeply, you wind up living shallow. You say yes to things that don't align. You chase goals that aren't yours. You repeat patterns that no longer serve you. And then you wonder why you feel weird, even when everything appears right. People spend hours managing their schedule, but almost no time asking why they're doing what they're doing. They labor hard all week, but never stop to examine whether their job is creating momentum or merely movement. They pour energy into relationships, habits, responsibilities, but rarely pause to consider what it's all for. Thinking time allows you the room to reconnect with that why. And this style of thinking isn't passive. It's structured. It's intentional. It's protected. You carve out time, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, maybe more, and you sit with a notebook, with a question, with a mind that's allowed to run deep. Instead of just fast, you ask stuff like, what's working? What needs to change? Where am I headed? What am I avoiding? What would a wiser version of me do next? You let those questions breathe. You don't rush the replies. You don't judge your thoughts. You just listen. You capture. You think. And in that process, you find gold. Insights that don't emerge from motion. Ideas that don't arise amid hustle. Truths that are drowned out by hurry. When you create this habit, your decisions become sharper. Your confidence develops. You stop second guessing yourself because you've taken the time to know what you actually think. You're no longer plucking thoughts from the surface. You're drawing them from depth. And they feel that. Your presence alters. Your remarks have more weight. Your plans carry more meaning. But that only happens if you guard the space. Because the world won't ask you to think. It will ask you to react. Your phone won't ask you to pause. It'll keep feeding you noise. Most environments are built for excitement, not reflection. So if you don't generate time to ponder, don't be surprised when your days feel busy, but empty. So you arrange it like a meeting with your intellect, like an appointment with your values. You placed it on the calendar. You keep it sacrosanct. You show up without distractions. You don't wait until you're overwhelmed. You make it a habit before it becomes a need. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't need a certain chair, journal, or the correct pen. You just need room, silence, a prompt, a willingness to face yourself, and the bravery to act on what you find, because occasionally, contemplating will expose things you've been avoiding. It'll face you, challenge you, push you to admit where you've been off. But that confrontation, that's when growth begins. And once you experience the power of that kind of contemplation, you won't want to go back to live without it. You'll no longer make blind decisions. You won't operate on autopilot again. You'll come to understand that the area between action and reflection is where knowledge resides. And more than hustle, wisdom is what makes a long existence. The third unorthodox idea for personal and professional progress is learning how to lose without losing oneself. Setbacks are inevitable. Failure isn't discretionary, it's definite. But what isn't inevitable is losing your sense of self in the process. What's not assured is crumbling every time things don't go as planned. Most people don't become wrecked by the loss itself, they get ruined by what they decide it means. They flunk an exam and designate themselves as not smart. They lose a job and think they have no value. They experience rejection and believe they are unworthy. They take a chance, it fails, and they pull back for months. Convince themselves they were dumb to try in the first place, not because the defeat was definitive, but because they allowed it to transform their identity. A person with a growth mindset, someone committed to both personal and professional expansion, interprets loss differently. They don't take it personally, they learn from it, they adapt, they adjust. They don't disregard the setback, but they don't let it define them either. They train themselves to disconnect their identity from the outcome. This doesn't mean you won't feel the loss, you surely will. You'll feel it fully, acknowledge it, grieve if needed, and name the sorrow. But you won't let it plant itself in your self-worth. You won't replay the failure in your thoughts so often that it becomes part of who you are. You'll take the data, not the damage. You'll extract the lesson, not the label. You'll remind yourself that one result doesn't define your complete story. One moment isn't your complete identity. And once you can actually accomplish it, you'll become unstoppable. You'll become someone who can walk through disappointment and continue building. You'll be someone who grows not just when things go well, but when they don't. Because the reality is, resilience isn't about never breaking. It's about coming back. It's about bouncing back clearer, wiser, and more focused. You will fail, you will be misunderstood, you will make mistakes, miscalculate, and miss the mark. But none of those things have to cost you your spirit. None of them need to turn you bitter. None of them have to rob you of your confidence. The key is to quit making every loss so personal. Stop turning every blunder into a judgment of your character. Stop presuming that because something didn't work, you're not made for it. Maybe it didn't work since it was a test. Maybe it didn't work because the version of you that tried wasn't ready yet. Or maybe it didn't work because it had a lesson for you that success could never have imparted. You need to build a mindset that can fail forward, that can stumble but yet stand strong, that can be humbled without feeling humiliated, that can walk through fire and emerge out wiser, not weaker. Because if you can do that, if you can lose with integrity and grow through grief, you won't be stopped. High achievers have all been knocked down, lost money, relationships, prospects, but they came back stronger, not because they're formed differently, but because they choose to handle things differently. They didn't let their losses define them, they let them educate them. So when things go wrong, and they will, how will you respond? Will you retreat and shrink, or will you stand and reflect? Will you blame the world, or will you guide yourself through it with composure, humility, and resolve? Will you let failure define you or purify you? This is a habit, this is an attitude, this is a muscle. You don't construct it by reading about it, you build it in real time. You construct it the next time something goes wrong. You pause, you breathe, you don't lash out, you don't spiral and you quit. You assess, you own your part, you let go of what isn't yours, you adjust, you move onwards. That's how leaders are made. That's how character is shaped. That's how legacy is built, not just in the way you win, but in the way you lose, in how you carry yourself through the valley, in how you retain your standard when it would be easier to relinquish it. The fourth unorthodox idea for personal and professional success is to monitor your progress in silence. Not because there's anything wrong with celebrating, but because validation should never be the reason you undertake the effort. If you only move forward when people are watching, if you only push yourself when it's visible, if you only follow through when you know applause is coming, then you've constructed your progress on unsteady ground. The world loves loud outcomes, loud launches, but real growth, deep, persistent identity, shifting growth, happens in peaceful places. It happens when no one's cheering, when no one's asking for updates, when no one's recognizing how hard you're trying. If your internal scorecard depends on external reaction, you'll quit the second you feel unseen. You can't let attention be your oxygen. You must grow skilled at making improvement alone, at becoming your own witness, at getting stronger, sharper, and clearer without requiring someone to clap for you every step of the way. Because those claps don't come often, not at first. And the longer you create something that counts, the more invisible it becomes to the outer world. Most of your breakthroughs won't be evident to anyone. The instant you quit procrastinating, no headline. The instant you don't let fear dictate your day, no viral post. The hours you spend reworking anything until it fits your standard, no cause for joy in anyone else's perspective. But those moments matter, they're the bricks. They're the muscle, they're the proof. If you don't learn to celebrate yourself in solitude, you'll miss the depth of your own growth. You'll keep seeking externally for evidence that you're okay, signs that you're progressing, signs that you're valid. But you don't need signs, you need standards. You need to know what your progress looks like from the inside. That means tracking what no one else sees. Your consistency, your self-talk, your discipline, your patience, your alignment. The way you bounce back after a rough day. The way you honored your plan even when no one would have faulted you for breaking it. Those are the measures that matter. You cease declaring every step. You cease broadcasting every idea. You cease explaining yourself to others who don't know the background for your transformation. Not because you're concealing, but because you're focused. Growth isn't a performance, it's a posture. It's a way of living. When it's real, it doesn't need a spotlight. This is where maturity lives. In the calm, in the dedication that doesn't need regular input, in the kind of progress that comes from within, not based on reaction, but on reflection. You know who you are. You know what you're building. You don't need to prove it. You just need to keep showing up. When you learn to measure your success in silence, you take your control back. You stop being emotionally dependent on likes, compliments, or accolades. You cease needing others to comprehend your method. You become unshakable, grounded, anchored in something deeper than approval. People will notice eventually, but by then, it won't matter as much because you won't need the external affirmation. The celebration will be a bonus, not the driving cause. The results will be evident, but they'll reflect what you already knew deep down. You're developing, you're becoming, and your work matters even when it's silent. The fifth unorthodox recommendation for personal and professional success is to normalize starting over. Not because you failed, not because you did it wrong, but because growth is rarely linear. Starting over doesn't imply weakness. It indicates honesty, self-awareness, and a deeper dedication to doing things well rather than just doing them once. Most people carry shame around the thought of beginning over. They feel that once they've committed to something, they must continue with it, even when it stops working or becomes misaligned with their mission. They treat consistency like a trap instead than a tool and confuse stubbornness with strength. But great strength, real maturity, is found in the fortitude to rethink. It's about pausing and asking, is this still serving me? Is this still true for the version of myself I'm becoming? Does this align with my greater picture? And if the answer is no, they don't fake it. They don't stay loyal to an obsolete route. They reset. And that reset isn't a setback, it's strategy, it's wisdom. Because beginning afresh with clarity is far better than concluding something that no longer corresponds with who you are. There's no reward for finishing the wrong thing. No glory in dragging a dead idea across the finish line simply to say you never quit. You need to normalize closing chapters, changing courses, and redefining success, not because you're flaky, but because you're maturing. The person you were when you started is not the person you are today, and that progress merits new methods, new tactics, and new standards. This approach provides you freedom to modify without shame, to fail without feeling like you've lost your identity, and to pivot with your head held high. You don't have to wait for everything to fall apart. You don't have to burn out or break down to make a new option. You simply need to trust that your internal signals count, that your intuition is valid, and that change is allowed. The people who construct the most powerful lives are the ones who know how to release. Release what no longer fits. Release the old timetable. Release the pressure to be consistent with a version of themselves that no longer exists. They don't stay in spaces because of habit. They stay because it still makes sense. And if it doesn't, they move. They don't regard beginning over as weakness. They see it as refinement. They recognize that progress often entails burning down the old model, breaking apart the structure, removing the mental clutter, and rebuilding something better. Not from scratch, but from wisdom, from experience, from the lessons acquired in the past iteration. This relates to habits, disciplines, and routines. You're going to fall off sometimes. You might miss a day, a week, maybe even more. The question isn't whether you can be flawless forever. The question is, can you return without shame? Can you pick it back up without punishing yourself? Can you resume the beat without taking guilt along with you? Because shame slows progress and guilt takes insight. The longer you sit in it, the harder it is to get back. But when you remove the emotion from the reset, when you make beginning again normal and not dramatic, you begin to accelerate. You rebound faster, you lead yourself better, and you stop condemning others for their restarts. You become someone who makes space for development, atonement, and second or fourth chances because you recognize that the real strength isn't getting it perfect the first time. The real strength is getting it right eventually. It's refusing to give up. It's being bold enough to begin over. So, make peace with the reset. Choose it, utilize it, and be proud of it. Starting anew doesn't mean you've lost everything. It means you're using what you've learned to move differently. That mindset, that courage, that flexibility in the face of pressure, that's what makes progress sustainable. That's what makes success repeatable. The sixth unorthodox strategy for personal and professional success is to get serious about subtraction, not just adding the next goal or tool, but purposefully and forcefully removing everything that clutters your clarity. Most people assume they need more to grow, more information, more organization, more effort. But the truth is, they don't need to add, they need to delete. Growth isn't merely built via addition, it's accelerated through subtraction. When you eliminate the noise, the genuine signal emerges. When you stop chasing 10 directions, you eventually make progress in one. When you stop trying to keep everyone pleased, you reconnect with who you are. When you stop maintaining your image, you start constructing your foundation. But subtraction is scary. It feels like loss, like giving something up. And if your identity is related to business, or if your self-worth is caught up in how busy your schedule is, then the concept of eliminating seems like failure. But it's not failure. It's focus. It's freedom. It's the intentional eradication of everything that distracts you from your mission. You don't need to do more. You need to do less. Better, you need fewer obligations, fewer conflicting ambitions, fewer open tabs in your brain, and less individuals speaking into your decisions. You need to simplify, not because you're weak, but because you're wise. Simplicity provides energy, and energy builds motion. Momentum compounds findings. This starts with your schedule. What are you doing out of obligation instead of alignment? What meetings might be removed entirely? What tasks are you repeating that no longer move the needle? What habits are outmoded yet you're still doing them only because they're familiar? Then, shift to your inputs. What are you ingesting that increases tension, not strength? What are you listening to that draws you away from your basic values? What social behaviors distract you more than they grow you? What interactions leave you fatigued instead than focused? These aren't minor questions, they're anchors. And the more you remove what doesn't serve you, the more clearly you can see what does. Subtracting involves saying no, not soft, regretful no's, but definite and defensive ones. You have to learn to disappoint people in the short term, so you don't disappoint yourself in the long term. You can't keep saying yes to things that sap your energy only to avoid difficult conversations. Your vision is worth the discomfort of clarity. And the more you do this, the more you practice the skill of subtraction, the more your environment will align with your identity. Your calendar will reflect your values. Your energy starts to mirror your priorities, and suddenly, your life feels less chaotic, not because you slowed down, but because you eliminated everything that wasn't vital. This habit isn't about embracing minimalism for minimalism's sake. It's about alignment, precision. You remove distractions so you can show up with full enthusiasm for what actually matters. Your focus becomes acute, your voice becomes clear, and your success becomes exponential. It's not a one-time deed. Subtraction is a practice, a rhythm, a way of life. You revisit it monthly, weekly, and occasionally daily. What can I release? What can I let go of? What have I outgrown? What's no longer worth carrying? These aren't questions of weakness. They're questions of strength. Because your legacy won't be defined by how much you did. It will be defined by how effectively you did what genuinely mattered. And the only way to do that with greatness is to stop spending your time on what doesn't matter. The seventh unorthodox idea for progress, both personal and professional, is to root your life in identity, not outcomes. Results will come and go, seasons will change, and one day you'll win, the next you might lose. But who you are, that must remain steadfast. It has to be built on something deeper than your achievements. Otherwise, any external change will trigger an interior tempest. Most people live with shaky confidence because their sense of self is overly attached to their performance. When things go smoothly, they feel strong, but when things come apart, so do they. That cycle is taxing. It makes you reactive, insecure, and hinders you from establishing something sustainable. Consistency demands a firm basis, and identity is that foundation. You can't develop a powerful life if you're doubting who you are every time your outcomes change. You can't lead courageously when you second-guess your worth with each change. You must root yourself in something deeper: the principles you stand by, the character you safeguard, and how you show up regardless of outcomes. This is the cornerstone of growth. Who am I when things are tough? Who am I when no one's watching? Who am I when I'm not winning? If you can answer those questions with clarity and courage, you're ready to lead. You're ready to transcend your existing circumstances, since you're no longer performing. You're embodying. That's the pivot from chasing success to becoming someone who lives it. You stop judging progress based simply on external rewards and begin to judge it by alignment, effort, adherence to your process, and how well your actions reflect your values, even when they don't correspond with your expectations. This practice isn't flashy, and it doesn't always yield quick rewards, but it fosters integrity, and integrity compounds. It makes you trustworthy not only to others but to yourself. When you trust yourself, you stop chasing achievements to feel entire. You lead from a point of wholeness, and you build from identity. This impacts how you establish goals. Goals are essential, but they're not your compass. Your identity is your compass. You think, what kind of person do I want to be? And then set goals that support that identity, not the other way around. You don't just want more money, you want to become someone who handles resources with discipline and charity. You don't just want to get healthy, you want to become someone who honors their body. With the constancy and power that internal concentration provides, sustainability follows. This means that even when you miss the aim, you're still growing yourself, and that's the actual victory. That's what endures. That's what makes your progress resilient to swings. Because even when results shift, your ideals remain grounded. You stop comparing yourself to others since your path is now distinct, it's grounded. It's no longer about who's ahead of you. It's about who you're becoming. And this thinking gives tranquility, clarity, and an unbreakable attitude that's not swayed by others' pace. You build from identity, speak from identity, and move from identity. You treat your results as feedback, not as judgments. When things go well, you keep humble. When things don't, you stay consistent. Neither success nor failure defines you. You've already decided who you are. The eighth unorthodox idea for personal and professional progress is to train yourself to accept tension instead of striving to eliminate it. Most people believe the goal is comfort, stability, and harmony. They imagine that by removing tension, friction, and conflicting pulls, they'll finally experience growth. But growth doesn't function that way. It lives on tension. It's uncomfortable by design. You're not expected to feel perfectly balanced all the time. You're not meant to have all the answers before taking action. You're not expected to feel peaceful with every decision. If you're growing, friction will be a part of your life. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're expanding. You're going into new spaces, developing new talents, and leading in ways you haven't before. The presence of tension doesn't suggest anything is broken. It means something is happening. It indicates you're stretching, living in that precious between ground between who you were and who you're becoming. If you can stay with that tension instead of trying to escape it, you'll unlock levels most people never reach. Most people rush to alleviate discomfort. They make rapid decisions to relieve it, give up on initiatives when opposition appears, or avoid uncomfortable talks to maintain the peace. But peace constructed on avoidance is fragile. It crumbles under strain. True serenity is founded on strength, clarity, and the determination to tolerate tension until the correct next step presents itself. Not just the simplest one. Tension shows up everywhere in leadership, creativity, relationships, and identity. You'll sense the tug between relaxation and discipline, kindness and clarity, firmness and flexibility. The idea isn't to eradicate these pulls, but to learn how to stand within them, letting them shape you, hone your perspective, posture, and technique. This is emotional strength, the ability to contain contradiction without breaking, to move forward while feeling strained, and to maintain your core while juggling several demands. This strength is what makes you unshakable, not the lack of pressure, but the ability to lead through it. When you prepare for stress, you stop requiring things to be straightforward or obvious. You learn to breathe in complexity, function in uncertainty, and hold both vision and patience simultaneously. You quit rushing decisions for relief and instead hold them until they are ready. This adjustment transforms how you engage with others. You stop hurrying them toward clarity and give them opportunity to battle with doubt. You learn to hold that gap. By not demanding fast solutions, you become a better leader, a better friend, and a better human because you've learned how to be with people who are growing, not just those who are performing. Tension doesn't always feel good, but it is always educational. It shows you where your boundaries are, where your beliefs need refining, where your techniques require evolution, and where your communication must improve. It's not something to fear, but something to respect, learn from, and progress through. So quit resenting the strain. Stop trying to make everything easy. Stop presuming that suffering means you're off path. Often it means you're exactly where you need to be, right in the heart of a breakthrough, just where progress is happening. If you remain with it, breathe through it, and lead through it, you won't simply grow, you'll expand. The ninth unorthodox recommendation for personal and professional progress is to practice keeping your word to yourself above all else. Not just the pledges you make to others, not just public commitments, but those silent ones, the ones only you know about. Because that's where self-respect dwells, where inner confidence is built, not from how loud you are, but from how constant you are with yourself when no one is watching. Most people are better at maintaining their word to others than to themselves. They show up for appointments, fulfill deadlines, and avoid disappointing people. But when it comes to the commitments they make in their notebook, the goals they set in secret, or the timetable they created with full intention, they compromise again and over again, not because they don't care, but because they've normalized self-negotiation. They say they'll wake up early but click snooze. They vow they'll stop moaning, but by lunchtime they've spiraled. They claim they'll stretch, write, read, or plan, but they skip it, thinking, it's just me. But that perspective is when self-trust begins to disintegrate. And when you don't trust yourself, you stop making true goals, stop dreaming in full color, and stop believing that your word has any force. A winning mentality starts with self-trust, one decision, followed by one action repeated often. It begins with being perfect with your promise to yourself. If you say you'll do something, you follow through not for outward validation, but for personal credibility. Because when you trust yourself, you walk and speak differently. You don't need constant motivation, you just execute. You start small. You cease making promises that sound wonderful but lack a plan. You quit assuming your energy is boundless. You stop setting yourself up for failure. Instead, you set a basic standard. What I say to myself, I take seriously. I follow through. And if I miss it, I don't spiral. I reset. I recommit. I stay in sync. This technique creates integrity from the inside out. It builds a grounded confidence that no one can give you and no one can take away because it's not based on praise or likes or validation. It's predicated on who you are in the quiet moments when it's just you. Keeping your word to yourself promotes resilience. When you trust yourself, you're less shaken when things don't go as planned. You don't panic when things fall apart. You don't blame others, you adjust, you lead, because you've practiced showing up even when it's tough, even when you don't feel like it, even when no one would know if you skipped it. This exercise makes you more sympathetic because if you hold yourself to a higher standard, once you've confronted failure and returned, you learn to show grace without surrendering your principles. You understand how difficult it may be, but also what's doable. You become someone who inspires, not just with words, but through actions. People will marvel how you created your perspective, how you retain consistency, how you manage to keep improving when others are burning out. The answer isn't some hidden system or creative shortcut. It's simple. I keep my word to myself. I live in accordance with what I profess to want, and I don't make exceptions. Not frequently, not easily, and not without a strong cause. So if you're serious about growth, true growth, start here. Begin with your word. Start with the pledges no one sees, the quiet decisions. Start with the early morning commitment, the midday reset, the late night break where you choose to stay on track rather than make another excuse. That's where your future is quietly being shaped one decision at a time. The 10th unorthodox recommendation for personal and professional progress is to stop chasing balance and begin chasing alignment. Balance sounds desirable, it's socially acceptable, and it looks nice on paper. But for many, it becomes a trap, a strict idea that every element of your life must receive equal attention, equal energy, and equal emphasis each day. That's not feasible. Growth doesn't function that way. Greatness doesn't function that way. Balance means everything should be steady. Alignment says to focus your energy on what matters most right now. Balance demands symmetry, but alignment requires honesty. When you stop attempting to preserve the appearance of balance and instead focus on establishing a life that feels aligned, everything begins to shift. Growth is not a math equation. It's not about dispersing 10% throughout all sectors of your life. Some seasons require more from your profession, others demand more from your relationships. Some periods draw you inward for meditation and rebuilding, while other moments urge you outside for action and exposure. Balance informs you that any shift signifies failure. Alignment teaches you that intentional shifts produce momentum. Most people feel bad when they tilt too far in one direction. But guilt isn't always a symptom of misalignment, it's often the result of excessive expectations. You're not failing if your life isn't perfectly balanced. You're growing, you're focused, and you're building. When you're producing something substantial, it requires weight, priority, and the ability to let go of certain things temporarily, not forever, but for now. Alignment is not static. It evolves with your values, your season, and your capacity. So, keep aware. Ask yourself honest questions. Where am I being asked to lead right now? Which part of my life requires greater attention? What can I say no to in order to focus on what actually matters today? These questions will guide you considerably more effectively than any myth of perfect daily balance ever would. Living this way means you stop apologizing for your attention. You cease claiming to be equally available for everything and everyone. You become more present, since you're not trying to be everywhere at once. You become more effective because you've stopped spreading yourself too thin merely to cross off every box. You're not ticking boxes. You're making meaningful, purposeful decisions with clarity and confidence. People might not comprehend your alignment, and that's okay. You're not living to be understood, you're living to be aligned. And aligned individuals are magnetic, not because they're everywhere, but because they are fully present wherever they are. They walk with assurance, not because they have everything figured out, but because they understand where their energy should go today. This is how you avoid burnout, not by working less, but by doing what actually matters. It's not about fearing overcommitment, but about choosing what's worth committing to. You don't need a perfectly balanced calendar. You need a life that connects firmly with your values, your purpose, one and built-in intention, not necessity. Yes, alignment demands sacrifice, but it's not sacrifice without benefit. You let go of something, but you gain momentum. You release something, yet you create depth. You say no to something today so that you might say yes to something larger tomorrow. That's not loss, that's leadership. So, create your life in sync, not by aiming for perfect harmony, but by going forward with clarity and purpose. Some days may be messy, some seasons will be unbalanced, but if you stay aligned, if you stay loyal to your energy, your direction, and your truth, you won't simply develop, you'll change. And evolution isn't always neat, but it's genuine. And authentic is what builds a legacy. The reality is, meaningful growth doesn't always look like what the world tells you it should. It's not always structured, not always pretty, not always easy to describe, but it's yours to build, yours to lead, yours to live. These 10 unconventional habits will help starting before you feel ready, scheduling time to think, learning how to lose without losing yourself, measuring progress in silence, normalizing starting over, subtracting what doesn't serve, anchoring to your identity over your outcomes, embracing tension, keeping your word to yourself, and choosing alignment over balance. These aren't techniques, they aren't trends, they're truths. The kind of truths that hold you steady when you're developing something that matters. The kind that don't typically get discussed in rooms filled with buzz and hustling, but are what divide those who develop with depth from those who build for attention. Growth will require a lot from you. It will stretch you, break your routines, push you out of your comfort zone. It will test who you've been and who you desire to become. But if you carry these habits, if you live them, not simply visit them, every struggle will become an opportunity, every hurdle a lesson, every season a stage for your future evolution. You won't need permission from others to lead. You won't need applause to keep advancing. You won't need everything to go perfectly to be grounded. You'll walk differently, not because you're better, but because you're clear. You're anchored. You're building something real, and real things don't tremble when the wind blows. They stand because their foundation is firm. So don't just hear these ideas, use them. Take one, start living it, one decision, one shift, one silent commitment that only you can see. Then do it again tomorrow and the day after, until it's no longer something you do, but who you are. That's when the game shifts. Growth isn't a moment, it's a lifestyle. It's not a finish line, it's a method of going through the world. With depth, purpose, and internal power that doesn't dissipate when life becomes tough. That's what you're building. That's what you've already started. Keep going.